Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to Tet 9. So it says here in the Pit Yosef, והרמב"ם כתב בלשון הזה. Rambam writes like this. הייתה כתובה תרגום בלשון אחרת. If it was written in a different language, מלשונות הגויים, right, from the foreign languages, לא יצא ידי חובתו, he didn't fulfill obligation, בקריאתה, with his reading, אלא המכיר אותו הלשון, only the one who actually knows that language, בלבד. והוא שתהיה כתובה בכתב אותו הלשון, has to be written also in that language, the alphabet of that language. אבל אם הייתה כתובה בכתב עברי, but if it was written in Hebrew script, בקראאה ארמית, and he read it in Aramaic, לארמי, to the one who knows Aramaic, לא יצא, he didn't fulfill his obligation, שנמצא זה קורא על פה, because it comes out that he's reading by heart. וכיוון שלא יצא ידי חובתו, so he says, since he didn't fulfill his obligation, הקורא לא יצא השומע ממנו. Since the one who read it did not fulfill his obligation, also the one who hears from him also automatically doesn't fulfill his obligation.
Kavod Harav, can you please repeat one more time if it's written? You said if it was written in Aramaic or read in Aramaic, meaning written in Hebrew and translated.
The problem is that, you know, when it's written in Hebrew and you're translating it into a different language, that's you're reading it by heart.
Okay, this is what we also said yesterday, correct?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So this is the language of the Rambam.
Thank you.
It says, "V'raiti mi shehaya rotzeh ledek v'katav." I saw that was one that wanted to learn from here. He wanted to deduce the hu shetiyeh ketuva b'katav oto lashon. It says that it should be written in that language. The tate b'ainan. So you see from there we require two things. Chada shetiyeh ketuva be'oto lashon. First of all, it should be written in that language. Tarte the shetiyeh ketuva b'mimuchad ibnei oto lashon. It also should be written, especially the people who speak that language. What does that mean? So he says that comes to exclude if it was written in a language, right, which is called gifti, katav elami, right? So the same thing, that in other words, you have two different languages. It's written in one language and you're reading in a different language. So it comes out to be that you're translating it. No good. Okay, the enze klum. So he says, but that's not correct. He says, we're only really particular that it should be written in a different language. They shouldn't be like he's reading it orally. But if it's written in that language, right? So what he's saying over here is like this, right? That you may think there's also another problem, which is that let's say, you know, it's like, what we have today with the Sidur, you buy the Sidur today, so it's like transliteration, So, you have like, it's written in the Hebrew, I'm sorry, it's written in the English alphabet, but its pronunciation is in Hebrew. So he says, right, that's not really a problem because, as long as you're reading it the same way that it's written, you're not translating it, so therefore, it's kosher like that. Okay, so then he says, "Umedivrei Rambam atzmo mashma." So he says, from the words of the Rambam, it implies that which he says, that it should be written in the language of, right, the script of that language. Lo echtav kafid. So he says he's not talking about, the letters. That's not the issue. El alashon. He's talking about the language itself. Because he concludes there about im hayta ktuva b'chtav ivri. So he says if it was written in Hebrew, right, script, the Qur'an Aramit, and he read it in Aramaic, the Aramim, for the one who speaks Aramaic, lo yatsa, he didn't fulfill obligation. Shenimtza ze korei al peh, because that's coming out that he's he's reading it orally, right? He's reading it by heart. Alma, so he says, you see from there that which it says that it should be written in that language, the same language. Look at Tafid. He's not talking about the script, the letters. He's talking about the language. Because regarding the language, it's relevant to say that he's reading orally, right? He's reading by heart. Or not. And not with the writing. So yeah, this is coming to teach you this halacha, something that we didn't learn yesterday, right? Which is that, if you have the text written in a certain language, right? So in other words, it's Hebrew language, but the letters are English. Transliteration, that's what we call it, right? So there it's kosher, you can do it like that. Because you're not translating it, you're just reading what it says. So it's kosher. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So it says here like this: if it was written, right, in some other language, right, some foreign language, so he doesn't fulfill his obligation. As we said, right, yesterday, he has to actually know that language, right? If he doesn't know that language, he can't fulfill his obligation in a foreign language. But if it was written in a Hebrew script, right, Hebrew letters, and he read it for Aramaic, so that means he translated it, right? He didn't fulfill his obligation like that. That's what we're saying, right? So because it comes out that it's he's reading by heart. So turns out, right, that since the reader is not fulfilling his obligation, right, same thing with the person who's listening, he's not fulfilling the obligation, same thing. Okay. So says Rama here, Haga, אבל אין לחוש באיזה כתב כתובה, right? So he brings, right, what we saw it in the Bit Yosef just now, the Rama. Right? What is he saying? But, as we said, right, if it's a different language and you're translating, this is a problem. But, as we said, right, if you're just doing transliteration, right, like those sidurim that we have today. So what does that mean? That it's written in a script, let's say in English, right? The script is English, the letters are English, but the words are being pronounced in Hebrew, right? So that's kosher because you're not translating it, you're just reading it. If you have any questions, let me know, right? I hope you understand what I'm telling you.
Now I understood. Thank you.
Okay, great. So that's it, right? We'll go to the next one, which is Yud. But the truth is, nowadays, we don't really have anything like this. What I mean to say is, right, that you're not going to find any Megillah which is written in a foreign language, or anything like this today. They're all written in Hebrew. There's nothing doesn't exist today. This kind of thing. Maybe in the old days, they used to pull off these tricks. They used to pull off these stunts. Today it doesn't exist. This kind of thing. Every Megillah is written the same way, in Hebrew. Right? The only difference is today, whether it's written in the Sephardi way, the Ashkenazi way, or the Hasidic way, This is the only difference that we have today. Otherwise, it's all the same. What do I mean to say? I mean by the shapes of the letters, right? The shapes of the letters are a little bit different with the Sephardim, the Ashkenazim, right? The Hasidim, a little bit different. That's about it. Okay. So all the Megillot that you have today, that you're gonna buy in the store, right? Those Art Scroll and this, Feldheim and God knows what. Those are not kosher, they're in English, but they're not kosher, right? Because they're not written on parchment and so forth and so on. Those are just like photocopies basically today. So, those are not kosher, right? So we already said yesterday that if you have one of those, and you should, hopefully you do have, right? So if you take it to the reading with you, right, just, look at it, but don't read it out loud because it's not kosher. Okay. Let's go on. We're going to Yud Aleph 11. So it says here the Bit Yosef. Raitish Kataba Rivash, right? That says the Rivash, she says, Tehashta en yotz'in yedecha batam Megillah k'tuba belashon laz. Oh, so the Rivash wants to say over here, says nowadays, if it's written in a foreign language, you can't fulfill your obligation like that. He says nowadays. Even if you read for somebody who knows that language, what's the reason why? Right? Mishum de'aminan begimah, because we say in the Gemara, atu anan achashtanim benem remachim miadinan, right? So it says in the Gemara, it says, what, do you think we know every word which is written in the Megillah, what it means? In other words, there are also some words in the Megillah that we also, the rabbis, whatever, right? We don't know what it means. So there are a couple of words there that we're not sure what they mean. But we do fulfill our obligation, don't we? Nevertheless. Miadinan v'afal pi shenu loazim, right? Lush pigush dilash yagush any adua shezeh laz, right? So he says all these languages, right? He's probably talking about several languages here. So he says, right? It's not known that these things are foreign words, foreign language. So it's as if the rabbis of the Talmud don't know what they mean. Right? How are we going to know what it means, right? Obviously, we don't know. So here, right, this is something unique here. We see that Maran here, the Bet Yosef, argues with the Rivash, right? Which is not something that happens very often. He usually paskins like the Rivash in the Bet Yosef, So he argues, yeah.
I'm sorry, who was the Rivash?
Oh, okay. So here's the name, right? It's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Sheshat.
Thank you.
Yes, this was the last generation of the Rishonim, the earlier authorities. He was in Spain. He was a Spanish rabbi. So he was like the last generation. And Maran was probably like 100 years after him, something like that. So they weren't that far apart, or whatever, right? Something like that. So Maran was also in Spain, right? And then, with the Inquisition, he had to leave, right? So he left Spain and he went to Turkey, and then he settled in Eretz Israel, right? So this is what happened, right? After the Rivash passed away, at that juncture, the Inquisition came on, and right, the rest is history, as I say, right? Okay, so Maran had to leave, because of that. He had to flee. So yeah, but the thing is that the Rivash, is very authoritative in general. So usually, we don't argue with him. We just paskin like him. Don't ask me why. You can ask me why. The reason is because he was a big chacham. He was also the Talmid of the big line of Spanish chachamim, which is the Ramban and the Rashba, right? And then we have the Ran, and the Ritva, and he was like the last guy in that chain, he was the last link there, right? So he was very authoritative. He was like the final word, of all these big chachamim, and so in Maran usually doesn't argue with him, but here, right, we find something unique that he argues with the Rivash. So he says, right, that doesn't seem to me right what he's saying. So what does that mean? He says, I think that he can fulfill your obligation like that, today, even today. In other words, with these, foreign Megillot. So he says you can read the whole thing in foreign language. As we said, right, nowadays, we don't even have these things, But in those days that they had them, if in theory, if you have it, you could use it. So he's trying to say, right? מתוך הכתב וכתב בלשון לעז, כשיגיע לאותן תיבות, יאמרם בלשון המקרא והחשדנים בני הרמחים. So here's the thing, right? Says Maran Bet Yosef over here, a solution for the problem of the Rivash. Because the Rivash is telling you like this, right? That the problem is, the reason he says why you can't do it today like this is because we don't know what some of the words mean in the Megillah. There are certain words that we don't know what they mean. Very few, just like maybe let's say 5 of them, I don't know, whatever it is, right? Give or take. So the thing is, he says, since we don't know what they mean, how are we going to translate them, into a different language? We don't even know what it means. So Maran says, right, there's a solution for that problem, which is that what? That you're just going to read it the way it's pronounced in Hebrew, right? We don't know what it means. So we're just going to read it off, like, and that's it. That's how you solve the problem. That's what he says. Okay. So so he says, even though that person who's listening, right, to this reading, of the foreign language, he doesn't know, Hebrew, doesn't speak Hebrew. Yatsa, but he fulfills obligation, right? How is that? Because we already said yesterday, right? The reason why it does fulfill his obligation is because, when it comes to the holy tongue, right, Lashon HaKodesh, even if you don't understand one word, you still fulfill your obligation. So that's the reason why. Same thing over here. Okay. So he says, even though he's reading it in 2 languages, right? What does that mean? That generally, right, let's say he's reading this in English, the whole Megillah, But those few words that we don't know what they mean, we don't know how to translate it. So those he'll be reading them in the original text, And so it comes out that he's reading in 2 different languages. But he says, we don't find anywhere where it says you can't read the Megillah in 2 different languages, like one piece here, one piece there. So he says, therefore, it's fine. Okay.
Rabbi, I'm sorry. Can you say the name of the Rabbi Yuda
Rabbi Yehuda bar Sheshat.
or Okay.
Sheshat.
Okay. I think I got it.
Yeah, the Ashkenazim, they say Sheshet, but that's not the right way to say. We know the real way, the Sfaradim, it's Sheshat, not Sheshet.
Okay. Thank you.
Right? In Hebrew, the word Sheshet means 6, That's something else we're not talking about. Okay. Okay. Yes, the Rivash. Okay. I'm sure Esther has her chart out now. She's looking for the timeline there, right? You must be looking there.
Yes.
Okay.
I was doing that. Thank you.
Okay. Let us know what you find there.
Okay.
If you find something interesting there. Okay. So anyway, right, as we said, that's the story. So Maran says it's kosher. Good. Ulinyan ktibat tevot halalu, so he says regarding writing these words. Right, when Megillah afilu hen ktuvot belaz, he says even if they're written in a foreign language script, right? Foreign script. Letlan by says we don't care, it's no problem. The lo gara meishmit ba sofer otiot. So he says not any worse than sofer who leaves out some letters, or psukim, right, or some verses. And the reader read it, by heart. Diatza, we said, right, bediavad, he fulfills obligation. We already talked about that, right? This week we mentioned that. So he says, right, after this, he says, after I saw this, he says, I saw that the Iran wrote a tshuva le'arivash. So there you go, right? So right, that's the thing, right? That the Rivash was like in the same generation as the Ran, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Ran was older than him. I think he was his Rebbe, right? So who's the Ran? Rabbeinu Nissim Geronda, right? That's the Ran. These guys were, right, Rebbe and Talmid, right? Something like that, right? And they were also friends, probably. They were like buddies, whatever. So the Ran writes a tshuva back to the Rivash regarding this topic, right? He writes him a letter. על זה, וכתב בסוף דבריו, אין ספק כי הלעז ההוא משובש ופוסל הקריאה לגמרי. So here's the thing, right? That the Ran comes and says, that he says, those foreign things, right? He says it's definitely a mistake in all that stuff. So therefore it says it's pasul, it puzzles it. Adkan. So, right, question is, what does he mean by saying that? What is he trying to say, right? So Maran tries to explain this. So he says there's no way, he didn't mention any way to fix this problem. So he says, look, incredible, right? Unbelievable. So you see that what happened was that Maran in the beginning, he wanted to argue with the Rivash, right? And say that, he feels that there's no problem with this. There's a solution, as we said, right? We said what the solution is. So now, right, then he says, but once I saw the tshuva of the Ran, that he wrote a letter to the Rivash, and he also agreed with him basically, right, that it's a problem. So he says, therefore, better not to use a Megillah like this today. And I guess maybe that's the reason why they don't write them anymore like this, because you see, right, that the conclusion seems to be that we shouldn't do it, preferably. Very interesting. I do have some questions, by the way, on this topic, that whatever, I'm not going to get into it now, whatever, but, just briefly, my question is like this, that if the Rivash is saying, right, that, we can't write it in a foreign language because of those words that we don't know what they mean. So the question is, how did they do it before, right? That's my question. In other words, what happened now? All of a sudden, everything changed? You know what I mean? What were they doing then? So this is a question which is left open. I don't have an answer for that right now. But anyway, right, let's go to the Shulchan Aruch and see what it says. Maybe the Mishnah Berurah there explains something. Maybe the commentaries there explain something about this. It's a little bit of a fuzzy subject, a little bit cloudy. Let's see what we can find there. So it says very short, right? Very brief. Mish yodea laz v'yodea shurit, right? Yeah, this. Okay, whatever. Let's read it off. So it says, right, somebody who knows, right, foreign language, and he also knows Hebrew, right? And no yotze belaz. Oh, look what it says, right? But this is not the one that we just read now. We'll come back to this one. Let me just see what's ahead here. Maybe it was before. It was before. Maybe I went ahead. I'm sorry about that. 1 second. Yeah, so this is the one we need, right? Yud Aleph. Oh, wow, look what he says, right? He says, the people who are reading to the ladies, right, in a foreign language, right, the Megillah, he said, you should object to them. Right, there you go. Right, even though it's written in the foreign language. So you see, right, that in the end he gave up, Maran, right? Even though he argued, right, in the end he gave up. And he right came to terms with the big guns, right? The Rivash and the Ran. He doesn't want to argue with two big people like that. So he gave up. So now, right, it's no wonder that you don't see any more Megillot written this way, because the Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't do it this way. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Let's see if he has anything to add to this. Very interesting. Yeah, so Mishnah Berurah does a nice explanation here. I want to tell you what he's saying here. And so it says here, he gives two reasons, right, why you shouldn't do this, to write a Megillah in a foreign language, right? So he says one thing is that, the men who do understand, sometimes, right, whatever, they do understand Hebrew as well. So we don't want, right, the men to be reading a Megillah like this, because since they do understand Hebrew, as we said, right, there's no reason for them to be reading in a foreign language, even though they understand the foreign language as well. So I told you guys that yesterday, right, that if a person knows both, Hebrew and, the other foreign language, he should preferably pray or read, right, in Hebrew. We mentioned that, right? We talked about it at length yesterday. So that's one of the reasons why the Mishnah Berurah says you shouldn't do this, because there are men who know both languages, and therefore, right, somebody learned in yeshiva, right, let's say, so he knows Hebrew, he's pretty proficient. So a guy like that, we don't want him reading a Megillah, in English or Spanish, we don't want that. That's the whole thing, right? And as we're going to see later on, right after this, some say you don't even fulfill your obligation like that if you know both languages. Can you imagine? So that's one reason Mishnah Berurah gives. But that's not the reason we saw in the Bet Yosef, right? So now he brings the other reason, which was in the Bet Yosef, right? He says, Od Mishum, De'achtar Panim, Bnei HaMerachim, B'lashon HaKodesh Lo Shomar De'asur Lechatchila Likroto B'shtei Leshonot. Right? So he says, right, that those words that we don't know what they mean, right? So there are a couple of words in the Megillah that we don't know what they mean. Even the rabbis didn't know. So he says the problem is that, you really shouldn't be reading them, in Hebrew, Why? Because now you're reading the Megillah in two languages. So there are some who say that you shouldn't read the Megillah in two languages. Yeah. So he brings two reasons here. So right, but my question still stands. I don't have an answer for my question. Which is that, what changed all of a sudden? Because in the Talmud it says you're allowed to do this. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden now it became forbidden. What changed? There's another Mishnah Berurah. I'm going to take a look at it. Let's see what it says here. So it says here, okay. Not really much here. Okay, so that's the Mishnah Berurah. Let's see if there's anything else here besides Mishnah Berurah. We have Magen Avraham, we have the Taz. Okay, let's see. Let's see what they say. Magen Avraham. Usually the Mishnah Berurah brings the content of the Magen Avraham pretty much, so we're probably not going to see anything new there. Let's see. Yeah, he brings the same reasons. The Bet Yosef, the whole thing there. The Rivash. Yeah, okay, so that's been covered. There's also Pri Megadim. Oh, let's see Pri Megadim. Okay, let's see. There's no end. One commentary leads to another commentary. There's no end to it. Yeah, so he doesn't really add anything new here. The Pri Megadim. So I'll just take a look at the Taz and we're done. And otherwise, we'll leave that question open, for some other day, for a rainy day, we'll leave it open.
I have never been anywhere, even in the not Orthodox places that I was in before I converted. I've never been anywhere that they've read the Megillah in anything but Hebrew.
Yeah, it just doesn't exist. They don't do it anymore. Nobody writes them anymore. I mean, so.
But to even to
No
say
wonder.
if you don't know Hebrew, you can read it in your own language. I've still never seen anyone like they always find somebody who can read it in Hebrew, and if people don't understand it, they don't understand it.
Right. So I'm just looking at the Taz here. Let's see what it says. Okay, the Taz says something else here. He says, you should do it the preferable way, he says, right? Why do it the inferior way? Okay, interesting. All right, that's good. Whatever, right? We have all kinds of things here, but my question still stands open. I don't know what the answer is to my question. I don't know. We'll someday we'll figure it out. Whatever it is. Okay, so that's the end of the Yud Aleph. Yes. So we have. Let's see what else we got left here.
Kavod Haraf and the Orahaim says the same thing, correct?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Orahaim, no? Says the same thing, that it's preferable to read in Hebrew.
When you say Orach Chaim, I'm not sure who you're talking about.
The one who wrote the halachic authority, Orahaim, isn't that what's his name? OC. It stands for OC. Orach Chaim.
Oh, right. No, see, when you see that Orach Chaim, it means it's a section of the Shulchan Aruch called Orach Chaim.
Ah,
It's talking
okay.
about the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
And the Yoredea too, right? That's the
yeah,
second.
these are just the four sections of the Shulchan Aruch, you know?
Okay.
Orach Chaim, Yerodea, Eben Ezer, and Shulchan Mishpat, right?
Thank you. Thank you so
God
much.
bless. God bless. Okay. So, yeah, that's the story with that. And so let's go to the next one. Let's see what we got. There's also, what do you call it? The Orach Chaim HaKadosh. That's somebody else, right? There was this famous Moroccan rabbi, right? His name was
Yes,
you know,
I have his Humash commentary.
Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar, right?
Yes, yes.
Orach Chaim HaKadosh. That's a different book. I thought maybe you were talking about that. That's why I wasn't sure what you're referring to.
No. I know he was
Okay.
a big Kabbalist, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was the same as the section of the Shulchan Aruch that you mentioned. So I've been, sometimes I would
He
get
also has works in halacha. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh. He does have.
Yes, he does.
He does. Yes.
Very, very, very steep.
Halacha, he has he has all. Yeah.
It's very steep, that commentary.
Yes, it's a very famous commentary. Okay, so right, that's a different guy, right? He's like 200 years after the Shulchan Aruch, right? It's a different period. Okay.
And Serah Shimshon, Kavod Harav, I'm sorry, is more or
Yeah.
less within the period of the Orach Chaim?
No, he's one of the Rishonim. He's earlier, much earlier.
Okay, thank you.
God bless. Okay, so that's the story with that, and let's see what else we got here. So yeah, I think we're going to 12, right? Yeah. Second. So let's look. I'm just going through the Shulchan Aruch here to 12 to see what he says here. Yeah. Talking about somebody who read it sleeping. Okay, so let's see what it says there in the Bet Yosef. So the language of the Torah is like this, right? That Kara mitnamdim yatsa, right? If a person read it and he was like kind of like dozing off, right? He fulfills the obligation. That's what it says in the Torah. So where is the source for this? Right? It's a Mishnah, right? It says the Bet Yosef, Sham, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Uve Gemara, it says in the Gemara, Yud Chet Amud Bet. Hechidame mitnamnem. What does that mean that he's dozing off? What does that mean, right? Obviously, he's not totally asleep, right? That's not what we're talking about, right? Nim velo nim, tir velo tir, tekarule velo yada leadur esvara, right? So it's ve'ane. So he says, right? What does that mean? He's like half asleep, So how do you gauge somebody who's half asleep? That means like, you call him and he'll answer you, but he's not alert enough, like to give you like a thoughtful answer, right? He can't think, but he's alert enough to right to answer you, to respond. So he's like half asleep, this guy, right? Basically, that's what we're saying. Okay, that's what the Gemara says, right? Katav Mordechai says the Mordechai regarding this. Yerushalmi, right? Menashe hava yativ kol me Rabbi Zera, right? So he says that this guy was sitting in front of Rabbi Zera. The ka mitnamnem, and he was like dozing off. And he told him, right? Tells him chazor becha, right? Go back and read it again. The lo kivanta, you didn't have intention, right, to do the mitzvah. So he says, right, that we can say that he's not really arguing on the Mishnah here. That if he read it, right, if he's dozing off, if it came out of his mouth, he falls obligation. But the answer, so the differentiation is like this, right? If you hear it like that when you're dozing off, you didn't fulfill your obligation. Only the one who read it. Adkan, right? That's how he answers the question. So that's how he answers the contradiction between the argument and the Yerushalmi, right? So I have to explain this to you, right? What does this mean? What it means is like this, right? That if you're like half asleep, you're dozing off, okay? And you're actively reading, that means that you know what you're doing more or less, you're cognizant. But the person who's not doing it, just passive and listening, that guy, right, is worse because he's not doing anything active. He's just listening, So therefore, he doesn't fulfill his obligation if he's dozing off. Only the guy who's actively reading it. You following my point?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what it says in the Bet Yosef. So we'll just do Shulchan Aruch. We'll stop there. I don't want to keep you guys too long. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch, right? If you read it, right? If he's, as we said, he's half asleep, Hoil velo nirdam beshina, right? Since he's not totally, he didn't totally fall asleep. He's not totally asleep. Yatzah, he does fulfill his obligation. Aval im shama mitnamnem, but if he heard it in that state, right? Lo yatzah, he didn't fulfill his obligation, as we said, right? Because he's passive. So a person who's passive in that state is not really functioning properly because the fact only what are we relying on regarding the reader? We're relying on the fact that he's actively doing something. That means he's still cognizant of what he's doing. He's somewhat awake. But the person who's just listening, he's not doing anything. So he's out to lunch. That's why he didn't fulfill his obligation. Okay, I hope you got that. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll stop it here. Be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. Keep praying for our great soldiers and our great army and our great people there that are fighting against the enemies, the Nazis. B'ezrat Hashem, doing an amazing job wiping them out, right? Little by little, blotting out all those Nazis. Amen ve'amen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us, B'ezrat Hashem. By Purim, they should all be blotted out. Amen ve'amen.
Kavod Hav, thank you so much. Amen.
God bless. All the best.